The interest you have as an actor is to get re-elected. There are 4 reasons for this. The first is because you have spent a lot of time and money to become a lawyer. Note that this is along the trajectory of your lawyer career, etc. There are 2 reasons why this is true. The first is because law school is extremely expensive and hard. You have to spend hours pursuing this, you have to spend a lot of money on college loans, etc. But also note that because you needed an especially good college to probably become the DA, because this is probably something that people care about while electing you. This means that you had to put in an investment while you were especially young. It means you took the initiative while you were young to set up your college portfolio, etc., get into a good college. But also, these colleges are extremely expensive, which means you probably took on that risk to take on a loan. You would not do any of these things if you weren't incredibly certain that this is the path that you wanted to take. But secondly, your parents were probably very chill in the type of career that you wanted to take, which means that this was of your own free volition. There were not many incentives to push you in any way that you didn't want to go on your own. The second thing, this is because you care a lot specifically about being the DA of New York. There are 3 reasons for this. The first is just the amazing feeling that you get as the DA, serving justice for the people of the city that you love. The tears of joy that people come to you on the street and shake your hand and say thank you for the great things that you've done for the city. You care immensely about this. But secondly, you probably grew up in the city, or at least around this, and there are 2 reasons why. The first is because, obviously people in New York care a lot about about the DA being from New York. Even Zoran Mamdani's only way of getting, counteracting this whole thing about not being a Christian is just I was born and raised, I've spent a lot of time here, etc., etc. The thing is, people in New York are extremely attached to the city, which means that to get elected, you probably have to be from the city as well. But thirdly, this is just trivially, you are standing for re-election, you really care about this, you're willing to put in the time, and I'm pausing at 2 minutes, 5 seconds, I can't see my notes. Okay. Trivially, you're standing for re-election, so you put in the time and money to make sure that you can do this. It clearly shows that even despite this controversy, you still want to make sure that you become the DA. The third thing here is because you would hate any other job that you get in the event that you lose this election. There are 3 reasons for this. The first is because you have so much control as the DA over this city that you love, the city that you've grown to care about, because obviously there's a massive investment that you take to become the DA. You wouldn't do this if there were other job opportunities somewhere else that you could just walk off to, that you didn't if you didn't care about this as much. So because you have massive control, I honestly think that just lawyers like a power trip. They like to be in positions of power. They like to have, and I also don't think that you would be willing to put people's lives in your hands if you didn't genuinely think that you were someone who was worthy of doing so. But secondly, you just lose a lot of your reputation. Maybe wants to say you become and you lose a large amount of your reputation if you take a job somewhere else. This is probably because New York is a fantastic city that people romanticize a lot. So being the DA of the city is specifically something that you care about, that just feels really cool to have. But secondly, if they want that you go somewhere else and become some sort of important lawyer position, etc., this probably just doesn't matter to you nearly as much because this is the city that you care about. The fourth reason here is because you feel that you are the right DA for the city. All of my previous analysis explains why you put a lot of time into becoming the DA, but also note that you're competing against other people, and insofar as you care a lot about the city, you're probably doing it because you think that those options are much worse off. There are 3 reasons for this. The first is because, and this is a preemption if they want to say, there was a mistake made, clearly you probably might have some sort of self-doubt. The problem here is that this is evidence that you were given and you probably didn't 100% do this case yourself. This evidence was there was no way to know prior that this evidence was falsified. What this means is that anyone else would have made this mistake if they were the DA instead of you, which means that you probably don't feel any sort of mistake on that end. And the second reason here, and this is just again, you probably need an ego to make it big. To become someone who wins an election this large, you need to act like the big dog. You need to assert yourself a lot. I don't think that people can fake this well. They need to have it intrinsically as part of their personality to make sure that people trust them, to make sure that when they're in advertisements, etc., people know this is the man that I'm putting in charge of my city, and I'm in safe hands. So that probably means you only have won this election previously if you were someone with a large ego that cared a lot about the position that you were put in. But thirdly, like, you're probably surrounded by a lot of yes men. Like, because of the position that you're granted, this means you have a lot of probably sway in terms of people put around you, and they probably told you that this is like that you are probably a great BA because they also want to make it further in their own like careers, etc. The next thing I want to explain is why if you prosecute John, you will lose your reputation. There is two reasons for this. Firstly, because John is a hugely sympathetic figure. Why? The narrative about this familiar bond is something that people can relate to a lot because they have brothers, they have siblings. They want to make sure that this person is not punished for like trying to help his family. But secondly, James is innocent. Like, clearly this is something that has like a strong underdog narrative. But thirdly, because like social media is going, like believes it and is going to blow it up out of proportion, this becomes a national story all over the place because this is something like it's the falsified murder of the governor's son, etc. This is something that people care about a lot. But also, people already distrust the state because of the fact that like this information was falsified. POI from Bob Bench. Yeah.
Would you choose to not prosecute anyone you feel sympathetic?
Okay, Raghav will answer that. Next thing I want to explain is why this prosecution is aired a lot. It's just a strong narrative for people to attach to, and obviously, like large media companies want to make sure that they capitalize on this story. The next thing I want to explain is why the narrative on their side is much worse. Why is like David escaping not really that important to a lot of people? Three reasons for this. Firstly, it's probably lost a lot of public consciousness since this person was like convicted in the first place because they've been in prison for a while. But also, secondly, just note that like the families of the victims of this serial killer are probably not going to come out and talk about this again because this is going to like bring up a deeply traumatic experience in their life. And like obviously, like some sort of justice has been served, and they don't want to just rehash this within their own lives because they don't know if David is going to be caught again. This does like symmetrically, David can be caught again. Also, the third reason is just because like we probably have an obligation greater to innocent people that don't deserve to be convicted. I don't think that the harms that David inflicts onto society are directly correlated to this guy who accidentally helped him escape's actions. This person is clearly not a culprit.
People's sympathy to John only exists if they aren't afraid of the serial killer. I'm going to prove why David is the biggest threat, not only to the people of the city, but to your re-election campaign. First, who are serial killers? These are individuals that are very hard to catch. By definition, they are serial, which means they've been able to kill many people and get away with it. But secondly, these are people that are quite methodical, so they're able to cover their tracks, they're able to hide out for longer. This is a person that is currently in the wild. But thirdly, the media hype around David is massive, even if he escapes now, or even if he was convicted 20 years earlier. This is because these are stories of people that often continue over time. Jack the Ripper was a serial killer in the 1800s. We still are afraid of him and name him. We think the sorts of aura nicknames that these people get, as well as the fear that they're able to perpetuate through media narratives, but also through the visceral images that people themselves see. So they like people had to face curfews when this person was active. There were police that were patrolling these areas, that were scouting these areas and things like that. People remember all of these, and the threat of the serial killer is massive in people's head. But secondly, why was David getting prosecuted a massive victory for your own thing? The first is because this is a historic case. The very fact that these people are just caught very less often means that your victory as a department was that you were able to find this person and then prosecute him. This means that it is very rare for you to catch these things. But secondly, there was massive amounts of hype that also further perpetuated about the capacity of David. So things like people being there within the courtroom, watching his testimonies, jury people giving interviews later on about how frightening this person was, and things like that. This is obviously like a televised, or even if it's not televised, the narratives of David and how big of a psychopath this is are things that people still continue and are likely to remember. There are two implications of this. First, people are fucking terrified of David being out in the open. Of course, this is a news. Prison outbreaks happen very rarely, if at all. So the reach that this has is massive. Everyone in the city and everyone within New York, if not the entire country, knows about this lapse of judgment and that this person is out in the back. But secondly, this past prosecution and imprisonment was seen as a massive victory for your own department, which means that a lot of legacy of other lawyers is also tied towards these cases, and this is going to be helpful earlier on when I prove that your incentive don't only last only to elections because it's speculative whether or not you win, but the extent to the legacy and the way that other lawyers and people within your own community end up remembering you and things like that. Of course, the actor cares about re-election. We will possibly also care about legal principles and making sure that they are doing the right thing, because they, of course, being a DA, had offers to go to private companies and things like that, but they choose to become a DA and serve the public. But secondly, you often do care about your legacy and reputation because elections are just quite speculative. The The first argument, and this is the largest crux of argumentation coming from opening opposition, is why this is the best boost to you solidifying your chances in the election, and why it helps boost your reputation regardless of the level, how the election ends up going. Let's examine the facts. John is in fact quite guilty for 3 reasons. First, this is a crime of prison break that happened pre-evidence, so John did not know that his brother is innocent, he just believed it. In the rule of law, this is known as aiding and abetting, because until we found out that the evidence was present, James was a convicted person, which means in the rule of law, this was a person who was aiding a criminal and therefore ought to be prosecuted. But secondly, we think that this has caused negative harm and spillover, so it's true that maybe no one died in the prison break and no one was hurt, but you have still released a killer out in the report, so you are responsible for any sort of harm that David is therefore able to cause. But thirdly, we just think that prison chaos just is a massively risky thing, so when you do a prison break, you have to turn off the lights, you have to step on state jurisdiction, you have to break this person out. John did not know for certain whether or not other people would not be harmed, so there were possibilities of other risks that were still carried out by his action. All of this means 3 things. First, it is absolutely justified to try John, because the evidence that came was later on, and therefore cannot be enough to not accuse John of his crime. The crime of prison break is independent of the jurisdiction and the sentences that happened to James. But secondly, even if closing government and opening government can somehow prove why John independently is not guilty, the public believes that John is guilty, because now public has been exposed to the harms of the serial killer only by virtue of the actions that John is taking. This means this amount of public pressure, and this is the seal clarification. The population now ties you to the jailbreaking of this individual. Why then is prosecuting this person great? 3 reasons. First, the people feel that some sort of progress is going on. So of course there is a manhunt that is going on for David, but that is still not enough when you and your parents and your children are faced with the threat of a serial killer at any point walking into your home, taking a knife to your throat and just making effigies out of you, and having your intestines on the wall. That is the point at which people feel afraid. They do not think that they ought to be subjected to this harm. But secondly, not only do they have no sympathy for John because they've been subjected to these sorts of risks and harm, they also extend that to you. On their comparative, if you never prosecuted, people blame you and they think that it is your fault that this person is out in the open, regardless of whether or not David is caught or ends up killing someone. You ought to be harder and you ought to take a stance and punish this individual. But thirdly, we just think the amount of appeasement this gets is massive, because what it means is that you're able to engage this to increase your popularity heading into the election. Now you can run more campaigns and narratives about how you are the one district attorney that does not fall prey to the sympathetic cries of prisoners and of these people, because of course criminal cases happen every day. You are taking a harder stance and you're showing to individuals why you are actually the right person to be able to carry this thing down. Even if we don't win over the public, at least we're able to decrease the extent to which they end up hating us, and therefore it is the right action for this actor to take. I'll take closing.
So even if you prosecute John, David is still out there, people still take responsibility. Because even if John goes to jail, the serial killer is still out.
That's fine, because if you don't do anything and you are softer, then people continue to extend that blame onto you. The fact that you are in action and you are not doing what is in the interest of the people of your own city is a narrative that is used against you. It is seen as you going soft and not doing what is right for the city, and therefore even if it's true that you can't win over the election as a result of this, not doing anything and letting this person go free is extremely damaging to your chances in the election. But secondly, this is extremely harmful for your reputation within the legal circles as well. Lawyers work in like a very involved system. They meet each other on cases and they run into each other in the courts all the time. They interact with each other, they make deals with each other. The amount of interaction that you have with other lawyers, especially given the fact that you are a huge celebrity and things like that, is massive. Therefore, you also care about the reputation that you are leaving behind and the image that other lawyers in your own circle have of you. The point at which you are using the only justification as your belief for not prosecuting John tells these individuals that you were a bad district attorney, that you let your own understanding of legal principles get in the way, that you did not follow the rule of constitution and actually punish individuals that were culpable and things like that. The comparative on our side is simple. You respect the legal processes. It's true, maybe James can go free, maybe it is true that those evidences were tampered with, but that itself does not excuse John of the crime, and therefore you are still following the right legal procedure in ensuring that this individual ends up suffering from whatever crime that they end up serving. But secondly, we think the support from the legal community can also tie back to your own election. So if it is true that lawyers are popular and all of these different states have their own district attorney, the fact that these people can give you money from their tie-ups from law firms and things like that means that you can campaign better. It means that more lawyers are giving testimonies to you and are advocating for you in this election. But thirdly, it means that you're just able to preserve a lot of the damage that has been done to your own district by letting David go free. I think this is better. The comparative they have to defend is one where you take a soft stance where the media continues to question why you're letting this individual go free and you really have no justification. But secondly, they have to defend why opposition candidates can't use these own narratives against you in the election. So narratives that you are not doing the right for the city, you're doing software and crime against civilians, and you're okay with putting these people on risk just because you have particular popular belief means that you are likely to lose the election even more than the opposition candidate fuck you over. Oppose.
Two pieces of film. First, I'll explain why you probably don't care about John being guilty, because the way they should get elected each time you stand for election is just basically a popularity contest. And second, I'll explain why this person is clearly innocent, and as a consequence of which, if you do try to prosecute John, you're going to be seen as like public enemy number one. The consequence of which is that you're not going to get re-elected. The path to victory is simple. This individual cares about being re-elected over anything else. The point at which they don't get re-elected, they are not happy. This is an active motion. Firstly, John might be guilty. Opening opposition might be right for that, but it's unclear why this person cares about it. There are multiple reasons for why this getting elected as the district attorney is just a popularity contest. First, you need support from not just the people but other state structures as well. You need support from industrialists, you need support from the mayor, other parts of the government, and this doesn't just come by you being nice, this comes by you trading favors. So they ask you to prosecute someone, in return for which you say that, well, get me these many votes. They ask you to prosecute someone else, you say that, well, in return get me some funding. As a consequence of which, if you have been elected as the district attorney, this has only been possible with the support of multiple people, which means you've probably been a sold out individual long ago. This doesn't necessarily mean that you're inherently corrupt and you never prosecute anyone else and you hide criminals. What it just means is that your priority isn't to always deliver justice. The second thing to remember in this frame is that it's quite difficult to become the district attorney. I need you to remember there are dozens of district attorney generals and assistants as well who each stand up for election each time. So if you want to win, it's not just that do people like you, it's that do people like you more than others. So the point at which you cannot get support at a massive scale, you obviously cannot get re-elected. This proves why this individual probably has already stopped caring about who is guilty and who isn't guilty, and now simply cares about getting the power so that they feel good about the power, so that this individual is able to deliver justice according to what's correct according to them, right? This individual obviously has a bias of themselves where they think that they are a good district attorney, where they do think that they are going to do justice as well. And insofar as that is true, it doesn't matter if John is guilty, this individual is okay with it. That argument on opening opposition doesn't work. The second thing is that the media sentiment is clearly towards John and James. Why is this? One, because it's clear that James is innocent now, which means people see John in an empathetic light. They just see John as a brother who is saving another brother. Now, opening opposition is absolutely correct. Some individuals might see John as being an evil individual who like a serial killer out in society. But the problem is, even if this is correct, what this clearly points out is that there will be a lot of individuals who do see John as someone who is a brother saving a brother. The point at which they are conflicting individuals who are conflicting on this narrative, your popularity goes down with a vast majority of people. That is sufficient enough for you to not get re-elected, because there are other people who are like assistant district attorney generals who do have the popularity because of other cases who can still get into power. So the only thing you need to make sure in this frame is that you just like divert the attention of these people who do hate you, who do see John as guilty, onto other things so that you can get re-elected. So the point at which this news is widely covered in the media, this is a constant reminder that this is just a brother saving a brother. And this public sentiment is quite strong. Just look at what happened when Luigi Mangione was being prosecuted. There were widespread protests all around the US to ask for him to not be prosecuted because they saw him as an innocent person, even though he had murdered someone. The implication of this is when you prosecute John, this is seen as something that is unfair, but not just that. You're seen as the mayor's puppet, or you're seen as someone who's just trying to save his face right now. They say that you're going to be seen as someone who is putting out a strong face and is someone who stands up for what is true, but a lot of people would also look at you as someone who is just trying to save their own face by prosecuting someone because it was your mistake that this person was implicated in the first place. Note what happens on the comparative, and this is important. If you don't prosecute James, you can use the same amount of resources, the same amount of media conversation to prosecute someone else, someone who might be a serial killer, someone who might have sexually assaulted someone. You can prosecute a high-profile figure and divert all the attention towards this other individual. You can still be seen as an individual who is like doing a lot of good to society by prosecuting someone who is actually harmful to society. What this proves is that you can divert the attention away from people who see John as guilty, who see you having an authority, you having the decision, you having the power to bring like justice to this world, onto just like prosecuting other individuals who are just as like famous in the media, people who would also get you like a lot of fame and who would get you elected. The The reason you would do this is because there is always a trade-off. You cannot have a million famous people being talked about on social media. You cannot use all of the district attorney resources on prosecuting hundreds of people. You obviously have to pick and choose your battle. The point at which you get to choose prosecuting another famous individual for some other scandal that might have happened, this obviously gets you more popularity. It gets you the popularity of people who would have otherwise hated you for putting attention on prosecuting John. Yes, close it.
The paranoia from a serial killer being out is a lot more than you loving the brotherly story of two brothers being
No, that's true, that's true. So I agree. Both of them are right. This is going to create some paranoia. People will be afraid and people will blame you for it. And that's exactly why they would not want to re-elect you. There will be a substantial group of people who wouldn't want to do that. Which is exactly why you shouldn't shed more light on this story, because the point at which you start prosecuting, it's covered more in the media, it's discussed even more heavily. People are reminded that there's a serial killer out every single day. This is exactly how you get unpopular. Instead, you shift attention away onto covering another scandal, maybe another celebrity who who took some funds away from the state machinery, another politician who probably assaulted someone. There are hundreds of cases that go on every day. There's a reason district attorneys get to choose the case, because a lot of these cases are high profile. So you can just divert attention away onto something else. You are the district attorney, which means whatever case you take up, whatever case you're prosecuting is the case that everyone has their eyes on. So if you keep prosecuting this case, people keep talking about it, you are remembered as an individual who put an innocent person behind bars. People don't care if this is true or not. They don't really understand they don't really understand the legal language or the legal implications of not having enough proof. They just see you as one of the individuals who was responsible for this. So the point at which you can drive away attention from all of this, and you can drive attention onto you prosecuting another famous individual for another, tax scandal or sex scandal, you obviously get attention as a consequence of which. Now, I want to be clear. At the end of the day, there is going to be some reputational damage to this individual. The district attorney is being seen as someone who isn't prosecuting John. That's unavoidable. But what you can make sure is that your chances of re-election are higher on our side, because you shift away attention. Obviously, it's uncertain that you will get re-elected, but you shifting away attention is the only thing that can ensure that the chances of getting re-elected are significantly higher. Debates happen on a comparative. We are not making an isolationary claim saying that this will definitely get re-elected, but the chances are obviously higher than anything.
This opening government case is speculative as fuck, because they first claim that, oh, the media has so much scrutiny on this, but then somehow claim that I can distract the media by throwing a case, by magically finding another case that exists somewhere. We think that's likely to look far more suspicious. That look at this incredibly odd timing. You're choosing to prosecute a celebrity. You're choosing to take a low-hanging fruit case and argue that instead of the fact that you've let a serial killer out in the public, and you could have argued that case, but you're choosing not to. We think for their benefits to manifest, then this probably means that you double down on this type of illusion or whatever, and you don't answer questions. You say, oh, no comment and shit like that, which makes you lose face even more. Your reputational damage is even more, and you literally get cucked in the race for becoming DA. There's no way to make it back, because you're seen as a bend over. You're seen as someone who literally cares about prosecuting cases only when they care about it. Not only does this mean loss of respect in terms of whatever the people think, but this means loss of respect within the legal department, within the public prosecutor's office in and of itself. This is important, because all of their analysis for why you love being a DA is that, oh, I have so much control and power. But to exercise power, you need to have people look up to you. You need to have people be obedient to you. You need to have people that are cooperative and subordinate to you. On their side, at their absolute best case, you magically win with a tremendous loss of reputation, which means no one's willing to take up the cases that you want to prioritize. Nobody's willing to back you up when you have to make tough decisions in terms of which sort of case to go ahead or not. When you have to justify to people like the mayor or to the police why you want some sort of operation to go on, what is your approach on justice, etc. We think this means even if you get the seat of DA, it's an empty seat which you reap no benefits out of, and at that you are certainly bound to lose after that as well. But more importantly, this is a diminishing amount of utility, because you've already been DA. So all of their fantasies or whatever, desires to be DA have already been fulfilled. The harm of not being DA is quite minimal, but the harm of losing reputation is quite massive, because it kills your work as a lawyer. This looks like a lot of things. One, this looks like courts in judges in courts being a lot less persuaded by the types of arguments that you make when you go ahead and take the stand. This looks like clients being less willing to come to you to choose you to argue this case. This looks like a lot of supporting lawyers coming less to you for opinions. This looks like academic colleges coming less to you for your opinions or your articles. These are the exact sort of things that helps a lawyer build their reputation, build their career, and work their way to the top. This is someone who's literally been a DA, but when you go ahead and you act like a pathetic walkover, you lose all shreds of respect, which means your career is certainly not after this. You have no way to go ahead and argue this. The second thing I want to talk about is why it's harmful to not prosecute John, regardless of whether he's fucking guilty or not. The first thing I want to note is that even if he's by the facts not guilty, the fact that he has committed damage to state property which is used for corrections literally means that it is okay, and you choose not to prosecute it, says that it is okay to piss on state apparatus and you can get away with it as long as there's a cute boy with a sympathetic story associated to it. This is bad because it throws water on the effort of every other lawyer that has worked hard to put criminals in jail, because then the defense becomes for every defendant to say that, look, they had a crime of necessity. They stole because they wanted to feed their family. They were actually innocent, but somehow they still ended up committing a crime, etc. Which means it makes it a lot harder for these prosecutors to actually send people into jail, and we think it makes it much harder for people to have faith in them. But more importantly, we think it literally erodes trust from the people in terms of this state being able to keep them safe from the worst types of people in the population. They concede that serial killer out in the wild is a massive harm in terms of paranoia. We think this paranoia means that people just lose significantly more faith in the public system of justice. We think it's far more likely that people don't even go ahead and do things like report cases because they think, oh, what's the point? The DA will get bought out by someone. They'll probably not even get prosecuted. I'll have to go through all of these legal proceedings. My life only will be screwed. What happens as a result of this opt-out? We think when less and less people file these cases, we think less and less criminals go into jail and more criminals walk free in society. This means that more and more people are willing to go ahead and live, more and more people are willing to go ahead and carry out damage against the state, against people of the state. This is a massive harm that ends up happening, which is tied to a direct result of you as an actor choosing not to prosecute this case in the first place. This is really important because if you do choose to prosecute it, even if it comes at a magical chance of you torpedoing your career as DA, it still shows that you have a spine and you are willing to stand up for the right legal principle when it is just. You won't back down regardless of what the benefits that are offered to you, what are offered to you. Even if somehow you lose the election, this means you gain a lot of academic critique because you did the right thing. Your case is something that gets studied around court. There's a lot of commentary on it that gets passed around, and it's said that this is the ideal form of conduct for a lawyer and for a DA. These are the things that build your legacy and reputation. Even if you lose your DA shit, we think this sets you up really nicely for a post-DA type career. If you want to be an academic critic, if you want to go deeper into academia, if you want to join a corporate firm and consult them on advisory or stuff like that, we think this sort of reputation gives you the leverage to make big money deals, which helps you get all the power and all the control that opening government talks about in a way that insulates you from losing your reputation. Before that goes.
Yeah, but what if you just lose the case against John and
That's fine. None of the case is dependent on proving whether John was guilty or not. The fact that you take the stand itself means that you're willing to prosecute the case, you're willing to fight out the details of it. It's independent of whether John gets convicted or not. I don't know why this is the case, but more importantly, even if James was innocent, this doesn't make John not innocent. Two wrongs don't make a right, and this is something that's far more important within the legal context as well. Because then, if this was the case and you feel like it's okay for John to break people out, as the DA is saying this, then this presumably means that you can do bad things if it means greater good. I don't know, using human shields in conflict or whatever, allow the police to use these sorts of things, right? This sets really bad academic precedences in terms of law, which are directly attributable to your actions as the DA. We think this is what makes you a model case of the type of DA you don't want to be. But more importantly, it's true, you're running against other candidates, which means you're already lagging behind in terms of the narrative of, I won't prosecute John, because presumably everyone else is taking that stance, because they want to try to pin the blame of the James case on you. You are the only one that's in the unique capacity to be able to take the stand of going ahead and be hard on law, of standing for the principles, and that is the only thing that matters because it's the most certain thing that's important for your career. For those reasons.
I think going after John would be the right thing to do if you were from the red state and you are going for you want to show your tough on crime and you want to go ahead and show that you are going to be the person who's going to go after every crime as it is. You're not going to show any sympathy. You're not going to show any sympathy for a guy who just wants to save his brother. But the problem that both top of this is that New York is a blue state and the voters are largely blue. What I'm going to do is explain what these voters look like and why this narrative is the best way for you to get re-elected. That is missing in the opening document because they don't actually see this is a blue state. The first thing I want to note here is New York is traditionally a blue state. The voters are overwhelmingly liberal, educated and rich, which means they understand intricate concepts like rehabilitation. They understand things like just because you are, just because like you or me, just because they're immediately, they're not immediately convinced just because serial killer out, you should go to jail. They understand that if this is a circumstance that pushed you to go ahead and do the jailbreak. Because these are people who are persuaded by data, statistics, studies. They probably read more things, and that means they're more sympathetic in general, and they're likely to not be persuaded by tough on crime narratives like the red state voters are likely to be. But secondly, I want to note, they claim that you know what, like the serial killer is going to be a huge problem for these people. I think this is absolute bullshit. Because I wanted to note, sure the serial killer has escaped, but the search is aggressively going on for them. Regularly, whenever serial killers get out, they probably get caught in a month or so. That's what these people who watch the news of educated and liberal probably know. But also more importantly, they also understand that there are tools like that make it incredibly hard for a person to survive even if they escape the jail. Like for example, you need all of your payments are digital. You need a phone for everything to register, which means it's very hard. It used to be okay to be a serial killer and chill in 1970s, but we've not had any large-scale serial killers right now because it's very difficult to do everything. Also, there's like Israeli software that can probably figure out where the fuck you are in any part of the United States the moment you surface. So by the time you go to commit the next murder, you probably get caught in most ways. Which means unlike an uneducated person from Arkansas, the an average New York person is not going to give a fuck about what the serial killer is going to feel. It's going to be scared. But also most of them are I don't know, they have very sophisticated lives, so they're probably not going to be affected anyways. But secondly, I want to note, liberal voters don't like the state intervention in their lives by quoting the rule of law. This is part of their core philosophy. That is why blue states have legalized marijuana. They regularly push for things that are outside the law, things like legalizing sex work and things like that. Which means it is to show that these people don't blindly form their morals from the rule of law, but rather they form the morals from the situation and context. And that's why these people are more likely to be okay with forgiving this person, unlike the red state people. But thirdly, I want to note, and this is the most important mechanism that I have. I want to note that this is a huge anti-police. There is a huge anti-police sentiment within New York. There is a huge anti-establishment sentiment. There are three structural reasons for this. First, the police have historically been guilty of abusing their power, and this is a populace that's educated, so they follow the news. They are aware, and just look at the late night show and how many times they abuse the police in the late night show, and the regular audience is probably someone in California or New York. Secondly, I want to note, immigrants or black people are disproportionately affected by the police, and this is a huge demographic of New York. The last thing is that if you don't believe any of this, the tipping point for this whole thing is when George Floyd died, and there's so many people who came to protest in specifically New York, and they went ahead and prosecute druggers because people felt that this is such a bad thing. They were sympathetic about the situation, and they went ahead and did it anyways. But even after all of this, I think the unions have still been strong, and they've not been able to do anything largely so far. So what exactly is the choice that this DA have right now? So we tell this public the governor's kid has been killed. The blue governor we voted, his kid has been killed, and the police have been caught red-handed that they fabricated information. Even after that, why do you think if the police is going scot-free after fabricating evidence for the governor's kid, these people think, what the fuck is the police going to do for my kid? What the fuck is police going to do for me? There's already a large anti-police sentiment, and this is going to get worse. So there are two choices you can make, as a DA. Here I can say, hey, I am your DA. Nobody is above the fucking law. I will fight for you and create the populist narrative that I will go after the police. I will not go after the poor guy who just trying to save his brother. Or you him to go and if he wants to win the election, to go and say, I am your DA, I'm going to go after the police. Cool. I think the other thing I want to explain is it's not just enough that you have people support in an election. You definitely need political connections, money, and other things. Right? We'll explain why that's happened on our case. Because I want to know, right? A few pieces of framing. What do we know? The state government is a very powerful portion of the US government. They determine how the state funds are distributed. They also control the appointment of several executive positions, which in turn means the several executive positions they appoint make powerful fucking decisions. It usually is a stepping stone for being a president or other very strong political positions. I wanted to just take that in. This person's kid has been murdered and he is left there with no explanation when the police have literally fabricated and let the murderer go scot-free. Just when you step in and you say, I will be the voice, I will go and fight for you. Though it is hard for me, a prosecutor, to go against the police, I will still fight for you because I think this is the right thing. So when you say, it's a progress mentions that you can trade favors, they explain why the government is in dire need for favors. But you can say, I am going after the police, and I'll say, yes.
If you antagonize the police, you lose their cooperation. These are the people that bring you cases and evidence. Your term as DA will be massively unsuccessful.
You should try it in your speech. Maybe you want to go on another. It's fine. I just want to take a second. It's fine. I think the large thing here to explain is that even you want to pull favors to it, right? What do these favors look like? I think these favors are probably something that's exclusively given to the governor, because he can connect you with the right people. Because government also blue senator, presumably Democrat, right? So he can connect you with the right people who are going to fund your campaign. He can connect you with the right people who are going to help you, the right people who make your narrative, the right media team, everyone, etc. Right? This governor is someone who's already won an election, so he presumably knows how to go about an election particularly. This is something that's exclusively you get from the governor, and you are giving something valuable in return. Because he, the most powerful person in the state, has lost his son and he has no answer, which means at that point he doesn't really give a fuck. He just wants answers for his son's death, and that's when you're able to go ahead and give them for him. Which is why you can only do that when you make the choice to go after the police. For this, if you have incentive to go after, you're able to get large public support, and you're also able to get large amount of support from large amount of support in funding and also right direction. I think nothing can stop you from winning the election. So for the DA to win the election, vote CG.
In loud enough, right? Yeah. Beginning in 3, 2, 1, go. 2 extensions of closing opposition. The first will be a vertical extension on OO case in terms of explaining exactly why, even if not John is popular or John is not popular, why the prosecution of John in either case, even if whatever is true, is going to end up as a net positive for this DA in the next election cycle. But on top of that, a horizontal extension on why you will get the support of this channeling figure, which is good for you. Notice first, in terms of what kind of people go to these elections, because as of until now, they assume that the general public will be in full force coming to all the elections and be having a high turnout and stuff like that. But notice that even if it's an open general election, and people can, if they want to choose, go and elect, they often don't even show up. Why? Because they have to take a leave from work which is they were earning, which is gone. They have to know enough to vote in a meaningful way, otherwise they don't know what they're voting for, they don't care enough to even go to put in the effort to stand in long lines in the sun, to be able to sort of take a travel to the cost and all those kinds of things, to be able to waste so much time of their life. On top of that, they have to just in general care enough. A lot of people who know a lot simply don't care enough because they feel like it's not important, or the vote doesn't matter, or a significant number of other things. And for example, notice how people who show up to midterm elections are much less in number compared to people who show up in general elections, right? There's an implication that the number of people who go to elections is dependent on how specific the election is. The more specific an election is, the less number of people that go and show up actually are. Which means the people who show up for those specialized elections are generally a specialized section of the population which actually cares significantly about it and has a high amount of knowledge for it and stuff like that. Which brings me to who participates in these elections generally then. People who care a lot, people who are updated to a large amount of information, not just in general social media, but news media, deep media, articles in Wall Street Journal and things like that, because these are the only nerds who are going to go vote for a DA election. But notice on top of that, people who are generally fairly intelligent to be able to understand legal issues and the complexities in the first place, which are definitely grey area topics, like the intelligence of the panel itself is. On top of that, we think that these people, necessarily like lawyers, police, and higher education people, they will be more objective and critical about aspects of law, like maintaining precedents, like in terms of rationality, in terms of the logic, in terms of the unemotionality of the DA, in terms of the resistance to media pressure. All these kinds of things are important things that weigh in the minds of the specific set of voters who are more likely to show up and go to an election in the first place. And also these kinds of people are less likely to be susceptible to these kinds of diversion tactics or scapegoating or this drama that comes inside government. this debate, because these kinds of people can see through that stuff. They've seen it multiple times before. They have the intelligent critical thinking to know how something is, what should be done. They know what the facts are, so they don't need to depend on somebody else who has a narrative or has an agenda to give them the facts which is altered in the first place. So they can have an objective view if we're looking at information, if we're looking at opinion piece in the first place. Ultimately means these people are most rational in this way. What this does for you is it tells you that these people will see that this DA is a hero, this is a lionized figure. Why? Because the main situation is that mass media is extremely erratic, and these people hate mass media a lot in the present day, Trump's era, populism and whatnot, because they feel that the current media is so much pressure, is John innocent, is not innocent, is bravery or brotherhood so important or not important, and this can play a huge role and does play a role in politics right now in the way that people sort of make decisions. And these elite or these kind of intelligent people hate this shit, and because they hate this shit, they beg for somebody to resist it. Even if there's anybody in the media who like pressure them, they want somebody who is going to be willing to oppose any kind of pressure coming from the media, which means this person uniquely is the one to satisfy all the metrics for these kinds of people to accurately prosecute John, to resist the media, and to do what's right, set a precedence in all those steps. This is really important because the absence of material, you can't immediately believe OG's case, because OG's case depends on the singular fact that John is hated by everyone in society, because even if you try opposition bends to a marginal degree, but there's a debate in society about it, then a large part of the case falls through, because then you can't be sure you have majority on their side in the first place. What my case does is tells you why the majority is guaranteed by telling you who's going to vote in the first place, the incentives, and therefore why the majority is guaranteed. Now, time for the next extension. Let's call the mysterious killer of the state governor's son the shadow. Now, in the absence of prosecuting John, the attention in the media will move to the shadow. Why? A, because now that David is gone, is now away, sure, there will be some media attention to David. But fear is not as good, as powerful as a TV book, as something like mystery. Because mystery causes intrigue. You want to watch more, you want to see more, you want to know what's going on, as opposed to just fear, which makes you feel scared, makes you want to switch on the TV, makes you want to feel what's going on. But on top of that, you will not get news updates on David for long amounts of time, because nobody knows where the hell he is, which means the only kind of updates you're going to get are things like conspiracy theories or the kinds of like news media stories about who this mysterious shadow is and how there's so much power to be able to do these kind of things in the first place. But B, we think the overarching focus of society nowadays is about how there are shadowy networks and Epstein's islands and whatnot, and it is a little increased care and attention to outing these people and figuring out who these kinds of people are. General people care a lot about these kinds of things. But see, within the hero story of John, every time it's said, it will be said in the same breath as a mystery figure. Like, oh, who's the guy who actually did the murder and things like that. Which means any kind of media attention John and this hero story gets, and as powerful the government case becomes, the more powerful my case becomes, and the more time that the people who care about who the shadow actually is. And that's where, in the absence of John's prosecution, a lot of media attention will end up going to figuring out, speculating, and sort of investigating or pressure to investigate who the shadow is. In the alternate, comparative, John creates a lot of hype. We buy into the case that sure, there's a debate. We agree that nobody's sure what's going on. In that case, we think you have a long sort of media spectacle, you have a lot of case then what goes on, and ultimately that debate by itself takes attention away from the shadow. And at a point where this goes on for months on end, we think people have a low attention span, people have less energy, people have a lot of issues going on, they will forget about the shadow going into the future, and the shadow joins a list of shadows in the past in that sense. But notice this mystery shadow is an extremely powerful and well-connected figure. He got away with the murder of a family member who's of an important government official with no trace of evidence. But B, the murder is most likely motivated as a threat because it's the family member, not the state governor themselves, which implies this person has a situation of business political strength to threaten somebody to submit to themselves. On top of that, this person is to remain silent, which implies not a random terrorist or random serial killer, because these people want to be known, they want a legacy, and they want to be famous. The other kind of shadow which does want to be silent are powerful people and well connected. But finally, he has the protection of the police, military, family, evidence. He's well connected, well rich. He has a lot of insight now to the industry. What all this means is you are going to be directly as a DA supported and indirectly supported by the shadow. Why? A, in terms of indirect support, in terms of funding, pulling strings, and a lot of stories and sort of messaging the algorithms of social media to ensure that this continued prosecution of John, the continued lengthy prosecution of John is a good thing for you from the support of the shadow. Why? Because the long process of detail, of rigor, of emotion, it becomes the top of the town, and the more exposure you get, the more votes you get. The longer the thing goes, the more you're going to be in the eyes of the public, and they see you as the guy defending peace, which increases your votes. But ultimately, we think you get direct support because you're supporting the shadow, or you're prosecuting John and not the police people who are negligent in the jailbreak. You're prosecuting John and not investigating or focusing resources on who the shadow figure is. This implies you're this kind of DA who uses all easy wins,
Small easy wins are good for big shadowy people. They will keep you in power, give you promotion, give you funding. For those reasons, vote for side closing opposition.
Opening opposition out. There's absolutely no reason as to why being tough on crime within the state is likely going to win you the public approval within India. What they say is that you do this and people are going to like you. I think as your job as a prosecutor is that you choose not to prosecute some cases. I think it's completely fair for you to choose not to prosecute this particular case. We have reasons why this is okay. They don't have reasons why this is not okay. And whatever reasons they do give rely on public perception and media. I think we're going to flip this metric and prove why it's okay to not go out and prosecute them. The reason that why their arguments don't work is that they go out and never prove that why this is likely going to be a successful prosecution, or probably there's going to be a chance for you to even win this. The reason for this is simply, one, this is a jury trial. This probably means that you probably rely on public sentiment, as Sharun already analyzed to you, as to why there's a high public sentiment, as to why this figure is important within this extremely blue state, who has a higher sentimental value towards this person who has gone through this harm, who's faced a wrongful prosecution. But second most strong response is that the reason that you have to prosecute this guy is you only prosecute the first guy, which is his brother. This means that if there is a defending attorney against presenting this guy, he's going to make it public trial for you. This probably means that all of the public media perception is that you prosecuted the wrong guy, he went to the jail, his brother broke him out, and now you have to prosecute the guy. This is terrible for you because all of the people within the jury and the defending attorney is going to make this a trial about how you fucked up the first time and you're going to do a fuck up again if you lose this trial. They need to prove that one, the success of you probably winning this trial, but then secondly, why all of your personal fuck ups is not going to come into this. Then secondly, they don't deal with the they don't deal with the reality that you might just not even be the guy prosecuting this. You are a district attorney, you might prosecute him, but since there's a conflict of interest because you prosecuted brother, you might put someone else there. This means that in all instances, even if you are prosecuting this guy, there's bad public against you because you fucked up the first time, but then second, it's just I'm not sure as to why they're going to either succeed or change or have a chance of succeeding. This is bad for them. Why on the comparative, you win prosecuting the police? I think one, because Sharun already analyzes to you that why the public sentiment towards bullish and anti-establishment is really high. This means that their metric of being a hero is better actualized on our side when everyone hates the police, when everyone thinks that police should be defunded, when police unions are too powerful and being litigated. You go out and say that I'm going to take the big fish over the small fish. But then secondly, I think there is a large sentiment of how media shows this. Literally look at how if a governor's son is murdered, you are literally doing nothing about it, makes you look bad. They need to analyze why this is not done on their side and why media just goes over you not prosecuting this guy and just letting go the police who fabricated the evidence and kill the governor's son is going to let go. This is bad for you. I think you are much likely going to win the battle against the police. I think this prosecution is much more winnable, but secondly, flips all of their metric on public media and approval ratings because it's much more proximate to you. But lastly, I think both governments are just analyzing the wrong actor. We analyze the correct actor, which is this district attorney. If their metric is that you want long-term benefits and you want benefits after retire, I would much rather be in good terms of the guy who is the governor of the state, who sits with the people who are the governor, who are the in charge of the different counties within these governors, and probably shake hands with them, be invited to these parties, or be in his good books, so you can give me the funding to control the media, or probably have better public approval. Because note, if I am best friends with this guy, I am much more better off within the long-term metrics that should set off in winning the election, or probably having a cushy retirement life. Because I am telling him that listen, I'm gonna hold the person who probably fabricated this evidence accountable, or if not, hold the person who probably killed your son accountable. But the second thing they also don't deal with is the fact that they're just never able to analyze that why the harms of serial killing outside is solved. I think prosecuting John doesn't mean that serial killing is not out there still. I think media is gonna still know this if all of their benefits do symmetrically exist. This means that we are completely defeating opening option because it proves that while we're going over the big fish is much more important and being tough on crime doesn't work in this particular state. I think Sharun analyzes this much more. I'm going to talk about them on why the backlash you get is much more worse off and why on our side you get much better results. I think one, because this is likely going to be a big wave on corruption within the police. I think you unrack a long racket of why this fabrication exists. I think you will have a much bigger notch on your bed when you probably go after this. This means that you are prosecuting a case that is much more precedent setting, that is much more media coverage, and actually a big case on your track record. Because as a prosecutor, you want a winnable track record, you want a very public track record, and you want to be on the most legal precedent, landmark case of all time. And this is literally what you do. I think this analysis of this actor's incentives are much more fabricated, and you prosecuted and sent a man for the wrong evidence that was prosecuted. These are three things that you are accountable for, because this man went to jail because you prosecuted the innocent man whose evidence was prosecuted. I think one, you have a major prosecutor responsibility to correct this harm, because no, if other DAs are competing against you, they're gonna have a field day with this, because they're gonna say this man lost the original case, is going to negate the responsibility, not gonna prosecute the police, going over to be easy win. This is bad for you. This is important to you because you don't want other DAs to probably use this as fodder against you at the upcoming elections. You want to set the paper up of you did the wrong thing, you accept the blame, and you're fixing the thing by punishing the actual perpetrators, and that's a good thing. Go ahead.
If it is true that you are implicated in this case and prosecuting this case is easy, then when this case gets prosecuted, you get fucked up because you were the DA that let this happen.
No, I literally give analysis of why you are likely going to win the case against the police because of multiple levels of analysis. Sharun also analyzes why the jury sentiment is likely going to be on your side, but then why this is literally conclusive evidence that shows that this was fabricated. It's in the Infoslide. I'm not sure how I'm going to lose this case, but not only if I win this case, it's much more return on benefit on the winning the case against James. I'm going to win on their metrics. The one, they say that governors are, you want to be a governor and you want the city approval, etc., etc. I think one, irreversibility harm is literally just that you become a public spectacle, but then you lose the opportunity cost of going after the bigger fish and probably arresting bad cops or putting them in jail. They say that, oh, you are going to antagonize the cops. Let's weigh it out right here. I think one, as the governor, in your side you have the disposable of other law enforcement agencies like FBI and Homeland Security. You also have conclusive evidence, but you also have friends with the government who are going to help you out with this investigation. I'm not sure as to why. Police is a much more proximate strategic advantage to me right now than the governor who is not going to be standing by my side. And this is the only certain winnable metric in this debate. Why we win over all of them? I think we win two clashes. Where will he win the election? To this clash, our contribution is that why going after the police is actually important. And the second clash is where is he going to do the right thing? I think you believe that you are doing the right thing at closing government because you believe that in the situation and circumstance of what has happened, this is much more morally proximate to you because you fucked up. Then secondly, even if you want benefits out of this, this is the most proximate and real benefit you get.
Will prove that going against the police is an incredibly ineffective thing to do, and this will take out the entirety of CG and help us take it over them. The first thing to note here is that if in the instance where you end up going against the police, you obviously have an investigation that happens in the process, and you put a lot of police officers into court, or you end up collecting a lot of evidence about said police officers. This is terrible for three specific reasons. Firstly, this obviously takes a lot of time and it requires cooperation from the police officers, which means that now police officers have lesser time to actually investigate the murder of the governor's son, since they are likely to be in court giving their own evidences and giving their own statements as opposed to trying to fully investigate in the first place. The second reason why this is good is because it takes certain officers directly and puts a lot of public distrust on them. The fact that you are investigating and you are publicly investigating police officers themselves would suggest that there is a possibility that the police officers are corrupt. This is critical because now the public is far less likely to cooperate with said police officers in the process of investigation and collection of evidence. This means that even if the governor's son has been murdered, the way in which the public often cooperates with the police to ensure that the collection of the evidence is the greatest, such that you can actually investigate and collect the murder or find out who the murderer was, is likely to decrease because the ability to collect evidence decreases substantially. The third reason to note here is that obviously insofar as public trust decreases and insofar as you're obviously directly dependent on the police, in the instance where you end up prosecuting the police is also likely to share far less evidence with you and is likely to help you far lesser in terms of being able to collect evidence to prosecute the real killer. Because obviously the real killer might be out there and you do not have enough evidence to collect against him. But in the instance where you directly go against the police officers themselves are likely to not cooperate with you in giving up evidence or helping you form a narrative such that you can prosecute the right person. This would suggest that your capacity to even consider investigation in the long term decreases substantially, because the number of police officers that are now engaged with a law trial, which is substantially long, which might be incredibly corrupt and poses a lot of doubt on the police officers, high-ranking police officers that adjudicate how the investigation is going to be done, it ends up slowing down the process of you carrying out justice in the long term, and hence make sure that the governor's son murderer cannot be found out in the long term. The second thing to note here is that you obviously have a lot of power as the police, so you can still put out the narrative that the DA is
fact incredibly corrupt to go against us, because the jailbreak was obviously not the police's fault, it was John's fault, and hence you should be going against John who did the jailbreak in the first place. And lastly, I would note that you can obviously end up saying that as the police that DA is trying to save face as opposed to trying to actually prosecute the people who are responsible. Because it's far easier for the police to put out into the media that John is directly responsible for all the things that have happened, as opposed to the police, because the police is obviously not responsible for the jailbreak, but John is. John is the reason why there's a serial killer out, and hence he should be prosecuted. This explains why going after the police is incredibly ineffective and is going to slow down your processes substantially more. The second thing I want to note here is that I want to weigh this up against our material. We give you two specific extensions here. The first is that you going against John is likely to portray you as the hero, because you end up not only supporting media criminal justice precedents, but far more importantly, if OG is correct that John has a lot of sympathetic narrative surrounding him, this makes our argument stronger, because even after there being sympathetic narratives for John, we still end up prosecuting the person who is directly responsible for the outing of a serial killer out into the streets. This makes you not only look, firstly, a lot more reliable as a DA, given that you are someone who has continued to uphold the precedents. And I would note that opening opposition says the negative half of it, which is that you are going to face backlash. We explain why you are going to be seen as a far more superior DA in the long term, because this is the positive comparative that opening opposition just does not touch. The second thing to note here is that on our side of the house, we explain to you that going for the small fish is likely to gain support from a lot of criminal undergang members who are likely to try and hide the serial killer of governor's child. This is critical because the Infoslide clearly says that the governor's child has been murdered and the police does not want to give out evidence on whoever the killer would be. On our side of the house, this would mean that whoever the killer is likely to be a fairly influential person, because he is directly being protected and is directly responsible for the murder of the governor's son. This is critical because on our side of the house, this is the same person who can help you influence and can help you win the next election. But far more importantly, even if that's not the comparative, the fact that you're not going against the killer is good, because that means that there is a far lesser threat on your family, there's a far lesser threat on your well-being, there's a far lesser threat on your direct lawyer pedigree as a whole, because whoever this incredibly influential person is has the capacity to take you down and has the capacity to really ruin your face and ruin your ruin your legacy as a whole. This means that on our side of the house, you have far more ways of protecting your legacy and protecting yourself against someone who is incredibly influential. The last thing I want to do is go against opening up, because the general do not think they ever explain why there is as much sympathy as opening government will say. The first thing they say is that John is obviously seen as a hero because he's protected his brother. Obviously, there are multiple Hollywood narratives, there are multiple Hollywood movies. I do not think that this is the one thing that makes you incredibly sympathetic towards a brother in the first place. The second thing to note here is that there are obviously far more things to point out that John is directly responsible for the crime, and sympathy comes out of the fact that John would not be responsible for said crime, but on their side also directly responsible for the outing of a serial killer.
You're right, it's risky to prosecute the police officers, which is that if you want to win the election, you should divert the election and prosecute a large corporation or a celebrity.
Large corporations and celebrities can be prosecuted either way after this prosecution. I don't think that's exclusive on your side of the house, but far more importantly, I just don't think this is the tipping point, because large celebrities and large actors are prosecuted all the time, so I don't think that the DA can win or not win this election based on that. But thirdly, most celebrities, most politicians have a lot of connections and they can influence the politics and they can influence elections in the first place. You directly going against a huge celebrity on your side of the house decreases your chances of re-election, given that not only are you dependent on the media houses, on other politicians and celebrities who often support your media campaigns and often support you by donations. On their side of the house, these same donations decrease significantly insofar as you go against a celebrity who is probably going to support your media campaign or your re-election as a DA, but on their side of the house, there's far lesser ability for you to stand in the election and do as much donation work on their side of the house as a result of you trying to go against a celebrity. Lastly, I just want to note that this is the most important impact in this debate of what we explain. You being seen as a hero is the single biggest way in which you can be re-elected, because people need to know that not only are you trustworthy, but people also need to know that there are far lesser consequences of going against you. Going against the police has direct negative consequences in slowing down the process of investigation. On our side of the house, that does not happen.